There is a universal rule among the elder races that primitive species are to be handled with polite indifference, right up until the exact moment they become an annoyance. Elias Thorne was about to become the greatest annoyance the galaxy had ever seen. And it all started because a multi-trillion credit empire decided to steal his dog. Station 42 was a sprawling, neon-drenched hub of interstellar commerce. A neutral zone where armored mercenaries brushed shoulders with silk-draped dignitaries. It hung in the void like a rusted chandelier, leaking argon gas and illicit signals into the dark. Elias lived in the quietest sector of the station. He was a man of medium build, graying at the temples, carrying the distinct, relaxed posture of a man who had survived a lifetime of violence and had absolutely no desire to return to it. By his side, always, was Barnaby. Barnaby was a golden retriever. To humanity, he was a good boy. To the myriad of gelatinous, multi-limbed or chitin-plated denizens of Station 42, he was a baffling anomaly. The dog radiated a pure, uncomplicated joy that most advanced civilizations had bred out of themselves millennia ago. He chased discarded ration wrappers. He wagged his tail at heavily armed bounty hunters, and he fundamentally failed to understand the concept of a dangerous species. Humanity itself was the newest addition to the Galactic Coalition. We were the underdogs, the latecomers who had stumbled out of our solar system just a century prior. The elder races, empires that spanned thousands of star systems, viewed Earth as a quaint backwater. We provided cheap manual labor, rudimentary arts, and a convenient buffer zone against the darker, uncharted edges of the cosmos. We were not considered a threat. We were certainly not considered equals. Elias knew this bitter reality better than anyone alive. He had spent his prime years in Earth's special operations, doing the dirty, invisible work required to keep a fledgling species alive in a predatory galaxy. When his body and mind could take no more, he transitioned into diplomatic security and finally, into a quiet retirement. The files detailing his service during the Orion skirmishes were heavily redacted, buried under layers of classified black ink. There were rumors, of course. Stories whispered by veterans about a phantom operative who dismantled entire enemy syndicates from the inside out. But to the galaxy at large, Elias was just another aging ape. Now he just wanted to drink his synthetic coffee, watch the freighters undock, and throw a rubber ball for his very real dog. The peace shattered on a standard Tuesday cycle. The air in the central promenade grew suddenly heavy, suffocating under the hum of localized gravity dampeners. Lord Vaxer of the Zalean Empire had arrived. The Zalans were an ancient, untouchable aristocracy. They communicated in layered frequencies of condescension and draped their elongated, crystalline bodies in fabrics woven from the corona flares of dying stars. Vaxor was flanked by a dozen armored guards, moving through the market plaza like a god stepping carefully over insects. He was looking for novelties, rare trinkets to bring back to the decadent imperial court on Zale Prime. His gaze, a cold, multifaceted blue, locked onto Barnaby. Barnaby, possessing a heart unburdened by galactic politics, immediately wagged his tail at the towering alien. Vaxer paused. He raised a slender, translucent hand, and his entire retinue halted instantly. Vaxor did not see a loyal companion. His highly sophisticated ocular implants scanned the biological matrix of the creature, registering an astonishing, almost impossible level of emotional intelligence and neurochemical empathy. To a Zalean, emotion was a tangible currency, a rare spice to be consumed, hoarded, and discarded. A non-sentient creature possessing such pure empathetic resonance was a priceless commodity. It was the ultimate status symbol for a bored, ruthless aristocrat. "I claim this bio-unit," Vaxer declared. His voice was a synthesized harmonic that resonated uncomfortably in the teeth and bones of everyone present in the plaza. He did not address Elias. He addressed the station's automated magistrate drone hovering a few yards away. Elias stepped smoothly between Vaxer and Barnaby. He did not reach for the concealed plasma pistol at his hip. He kept his hands open, his posture relaxed, his voice entirely devoid of panic. With respect, Lord Vaxer, this is not a bio-unit. He is my dog. He is not for sale, and he is certainly not for claim. Vaxor slowly lowered his gaze to look at the human. It was a look of pure, unadulterated dismissal. Human, Vaxor said, the word dripping with venomous pity. You misunderstand your place in the cosmos. By the archaic accord of the Third Era, any unregistered, non-sentient biological asset found in a neutral trade corridor is subject to immediate forfeiture to a high noble of the coalition. It was a loophole, a dusty, forgotten law from a time before humanity had even discovered fire. Originally designed to allow expanding empires to legally seize exotic livestock from conquered primitive worlds. The magistrate drone chimed a high-pitched note, quickly verifying the legal precedent in its vast database. A green verification light washed over Vaxor. The theft was perfectly, indisputably legal. Two Zalen guards stepped forward, their energy pikes humming a low, lethal frequency. One of them clamped a harsh magnetic grav tether around Barnaby's neck. The dog whined, a sharp sound of confusion, looking back at Elias with wide, trusting brown eyes. The sound cut through Elias like a physical blade, tearing right through the protective layers of his civilian persona. His face remained a mask of carved stone. The lethal, icy composure he had spent 5 years trying to bury resurfaced in an instant. Elias took one single, deliberate step forward. The guards instantly raised their pikes, the tips glowing with enough plasma to melt titanium. Lord Vaxor, Elias said, his voice dropping to a register so flat, so utterly devoid of warmth, that the alien merchant standing nearby physically recoiled. I am going to ask you once very politely to take that tether off my dog. If you take him onto your ship, you will set in motion a chain of events that you cannot survive. Vaxor let out a sound that approximated a laugh, a dry, grating noise like glass crushing against stone. A threat from an ape. How charmingly primitive. The bio-unit comes with me. The Zalen procession moved on, their boots clicking rhythmically against the deck plates, dragging a highly distressed Barnaby toward the high-security docking bays. Elias watched them go. He did not scream. He did not draw his weapon and launch a futile, suicidal attack against a dozen elite guards. He simply turned around and walked back to his quarters. He needed to make a call. The secure line to Earth Command took 3 agonizing minutes to encrypt and connect. When the hologram of General Vance finally flickered into existence over Elias's desk, Elias explained the situation with brutal, tactical efficiency. Vance looked significantly older than his years, his face heavily lined with the constant crushing stress of keeping humanity off the galactic endangered species list. Elias, I am looking at the diplomatic feeds right now, Vance said, rubbing his temples. Do you have any idea who Vaxer is? He is 5th in line to the Zalen throne. They own 4 entire star systems. Their military could turn Earth into a glass parking lot before we even fueled our planetary defense fleet. They took my dog, General. I know, Elias, and it is a tragedy, but it is just a dog. The coalition has already authorized a compensation package of 5 million credits for the MisUnderstanding. We will buy you an island on a resort world. We will buy you 100 dogs. But you are to stand down. This is a direct order. You will not engage the Zalens. You will not spark an interstellar war over a pet. You are retired. Elias stared at the holographic projection of the man he had once bled for. He thought about the lopsided treaties he had enforced, the lives he had quietly extinguished in the dark so humanity could walk safely in the light. He thought about the cold, unyielding machinery of galactic politics, where lives were just numbers on a ledger. Then, he thought about a golden tail thumping enthusiastically against the floorboards of his ship, and a wet nose nudging his hand after he woke up from a nightmare of the border wars. The galaxy was a freezing, indifferent place. Barnaby was the only genuinely warm thing left in it. Elias realized with absolute terrifying clarity that there was a line he would not cross for Earth, for the Coalition, or for his own comfortable survival. They had calculated the political fallout, the economic sanctions, and the military response perfectly. They had calculated everything, except the unpredictable, terrifying variable of a highly trained human being with absolutely nothing left to lose. "I understand, General," Elias said softly. "A good man," Vance sighed, a wave of profound relief flooding his voice. "We have to look at the bigger picture." "I am looking at it," Elias replied. He reached forward and severed the connection. The blue hologram vanished, plunging the room into shadows. Elias walked over to a reinforced bulk safe hidden beneath the metallic floor panels of his apartment. He entered a complex 64-digit biometric sequence. The heavy metal lid hissed open, revealing the meticulously maintained tools of a trade he had sworn to abandon forever. There were kinetic disruptors, localized stealth webbing, and an array of unregistered, highly illegal Earth-manufactured ballistics. As he loaded a dense, tungsten-tipped magazine into a heavy tactical sidearm, he wondered exactly how many worlds the Zalans possessed, and how many of them he would have to tear apart to find his friend. The elder races truly believed humanity was soft, eager to please, and utterly terrified of conflict. They were about to learn a very hard, very bloody lesson regarding the mammalian instinct of pack loyalty. When you decide to declare a one-man war on a galactic superpower, the first casualty is always your own identity. Elias Thorne stood over a localized plasma incinerator in a rented transit locker and watched his entire recorded life turn to a handful of sterile gray ash. He tossed in his diplomatic credentials, his Earth planetary passport, and the encrypted comlink that tied him to General Vance and the United Earth Directorate. Within 30 standard minutes, the glowing bounty boards of Station 42 would update with his face to prevent a catastrophic diplomatic incident with the Zalan Empire. Earth Command would officially label him a rogue operative suffering from severe cybernetic-induced psychosis. They would disavow him completely. He was now a ghost with no backing, no safe harbor, and a heavily armed duffel bag. Elias took a black market cargo shuttle to the null zone. It was a chaotic sphere of tethered asteroids, decommissioned dreadnoughts, and orbital platforms welded together on the lawless edge of the sector. It was a haven for smugglers, bounty hunters, and those who found coalition laws deeply inconvenient. The air inside the main promenade smelled sharply of ozone, synthesized protein rations, and desperate ambition. Neon signs flickered in a dozen different alien dialects, casting long, bruised shadows across the metal decking. He found Jax in a cantina constructed entirely from the hollowed-out fuselage of a crashed heavy cruiser. She was leaning over a holographic star chart in a private booth, bathed in the sickly green light of the projection. Jax belonged to the Corley race. She was humanoid, but her striking obsidian skin was interlaced with glowing, deep purple subdermal circuitry that pulsed softly in time with her heartbeat. She was brilliant, deeply cynical, and the most reckless blockade runner in the quadrant. She was also the woman Elias had loved, and subsequently left a decade ago. She did not look up as he approached, but the heavy kinetic blaster in her right hand smoothly leveled beneath the table, aimed precisely at his center of mass. "I heard you were dead." "Elias?" Jax said, her voice a rich melodic purr that hit a razor-sharp edge. Then I heard you took a desk job for the Coalition. I heavily prefer the first option. It requires significantly less small talk. Elias pushed the barrel of the concealed blaster aside with a single finger and sat across from her. He looked into her glowing violet eyes, seeing the exact same fierce, unbroken spirit that had drawn him to her during the bloody Vanguard campaign. Back then, she had shown him that the galaxy was not entirely governed by cold politics, and he had shown her the terrifying depth of human loyalty. But the war had broken something inside him, and he had pushed her away to protect her from his own demons. The unresolved tension between them hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I need a ship, Jax, Elias said, leaning forward. The kind of ship that does not register on deep space tachyon scans, and I need a pilot who does not ask any questions. Jax finally looked up, a wry, dangerous smile playing on her lips. She poured a measure of dark amber liquid into 2 metallic cups, pushing one across the scarred table. I always ask questions, Thorn, especially when Earth Command just put a bounty on your head large enough to purchase a small, habitable moon. So, what priceless Imperial artifact did you steal? I did not steal anything, Elias replied, ignoring the drink. Lord Vaxer of the Zalen Empire stole my dog. Jack stopped moving. For a long, agonizing moment, the ambient noise of the bustling cantina seemed to fade away. She stared at him, searching his stoic face for the punchline of a very terrible joke. You are manipulating me, Jack said slowly. Tell me this is a complex coded metaphor for a stolen quantum drive or a planetary defense matrix. His name is Barnaby, Elias said, his voice dropping to a deadly, absolute register. He is golden. He weighs exactly 80 pounds, he has 0 tactical value, and he is terrified of sudden loud noises. Jax rubbed her temples, a gesture of profound cross-cultural exasperation. She understood the sheer insanity of the request. To breach Zalen's space was a suicide mission. To do it for a non-sentient pet was the definition of madness. Yet, she looked at Elias and saw the shattered, desperate man beneath the hardened operative exterior. She owed him her life from a skirmish on Ceti Alpha. A debt a Corley took to their grave. More than that, she realized with a heavy heart that she still cared for this infuriating human. Within 4 hours, Jax had called in every favor she possessed to assemble a crew. They were not elite commandos. They were the outcasts, the people you hired when the job was fundamentally impossible and the hazard pay was theoretical. Elias stood in a dimly lit hangar bay and evaluated his new team. There was Kyle, a towering Silici-based life form composed of animated, jagged gray slate. Kale possessed the physical strength to tear an armored shuttle apart with his bare hands. Bizarrely, Kale was formerly a corporate mediator for a mining conglomerate and spoke exclusively in polite, conflict resolution jargon. Beside Kale hovered Vex, a 6-armed cybernetic mechanic who communicated entirely through rapid hand gestures and a synthesized voice box strapped to their chest plate. Vex spent the first hour of their tactical briefing deeply offended by the mission parameters, frantically searching the galactic database for information on the golden retriever species. Let me process this data, Vex projected, their mechanical arms crossing and uncrossing in a complex pattern of sheer disbelief. We are penetrating the most heavily fortified airspace in the known universe. We are risking orbital bombardment, molecular disintegration, and eternal imprisonment. I have analyzed the biological schematics of this Barnaby. It possesses no venom sacs. It lacks tactical dermal armor, and it voluntarily surrenders its consciousness to sleep for 14 hours a solar cycle. Why are we initiating an interstellar war for a defective bio-unit? Because he is mine, Elias stated simply. And because the Zalans need to learn that you cannot simply take things just because you have the power to do so, it is a highly illogical expenditure of resources and operational bandwidth. Kale rumbled, his stone face shifting into what might have been a frown. However, I validate your emotional attachment to this entity. Elias, we must all strive to respect diverse biological priorities. Let us synergize our core competencies to facilitate a hostile asset extraction. Jax led them toward the back of the hangar. Resting in the shadows was the Wraith. It was a ship that barely looked like a ship, resembling a jagged piece of blackened obsidian dropped into the world. It was a heavily modified deep space interceptor, coated from nose to thrusters in experimental metamaterials designed to absorb radar, thermal emissions, and tachyon pulses. It was tight, deeply claustrophobic, and highly illegal in 7 different star systems. She is not going to win any design awards, Jack said, running an affectionate hand along the sleek, freezing hull. But she utilizes a void sink engine. It essentially eats its own exhaust and energy bleed. She can slip through a Zalan sensor net like water through a grate, provided, of course, that the pilot is absolutely flawless. Are you? Elias asked. Jack smirked, her subdermal circuitry flashing a bright, confident purple. You already know the answer to that, Thorn. Get on the ship before I remember how much I value my own life. As they strapped into the cramped, utilitarian cockpit, the reality of their endeavor settled heavily over the crew. The Wraith detached from the heavy mooring clamps, slipping silently into the freezing void of space. Elias sat in the co-pilot seat, running routine diagnostics on his plasma rifle. You know we might not come back from this, Jack said quietly, her fingers flying across the glowing pre-flight command console. Vaxor is untouchable. The Zalans do not take prisoners. They make public, excruciating examples of those who defy them. Elias looked out the reinforced viewport. Ahead of them lay the Zalan border, a terrifying expanse of dead space heavily mined with gravity tethers and patrolled by dreadnoughts the size of Earth cities. He thought about Barnaby, likely locked in a cold, sterile cage, confused and waiting for his human to come get him. Elias knew the political implications. He knew the odds, but he also knew the profound moral lesson that the elder races had forgotten in their pursuit of endless power. True strength was not the ability to conquer, but the willingness to protect the innocent. They have never taken anything from me before, Jax, Elias said, his voice echoing softly in the hum of the stealth drive. They look at humanity and they see weakness. They are about to find out exactly why we were quarantined on Earth for so long. The ship engaged its hyperdrives, launching them toward the heart of an ancient, hostile empire. Elias watched the stars blur into long streaks of white light, wondering if their stealth technology could truly hide the massive heat signature of a furious human heart, and exactly what kind of monster he would have to become once they crossed the enemy line. The vacuum of space is generally indifferent to survival, but the physical border of the Zalan Empire felt actively malicious. It was a graveyard of shattered ambition, painted in the violent, swirling hues of localized gravimetric anomalies. Jax piloted the Wraith through the jagged expanse of the Cinder Shoals. This was a treacherous stretch of cosmic geography where hyper-dense asteroid fields collided with ambient plasma storms, creating a beautiful but lethal barrier to the inner empire. The view out of the reinforced canopy was breathtaking. Giant shards of iridescent crystal the size of continents spun lazily through clouds of ionized cobalt gas, reflecting the dim light of distant stars. One wrong twitch of the thrusters, and the ship would be sheared into microscopic dust by the gravitational shearing forces. Vex's mechanical hands blurred over the tactical consoles, constantly recalibrating the deflector shields to match the erratic energy spikes, while Kale silently braced his massive stone frame against the bulkheads. absorbing the kinetic shock waves of near misses with stoic calm. Once they cleared the densest cluster of the shoals, Jax engaged the passive drift thrusters, allowing the crew a momentary respite. The ambient lighting in the cockpit shifted to a low, calming amber. Elias unbuckled his harness and floated toward the aft observation port, staring back at the chaotic nebula they had just traversed. Jax followed, leaving the autopilot to manage their relatively stable trajectory. She handed him a vacuum-sealed pouch of synthesized water. "You are incredibly quiet for a man steering us into the maw of the most powerful military force in existence," Jax observed. Elias took the pouch, his eyes never leaving the stars. "I am just calculating the variables, Jax, and remembering." Jax leaned against the bulkhead, her violet eyes studying his worn profile. "Back on Earth during the Vanguard campaigns, you were ruthless. You treated every asset as expendable if it meant securing the objective. You lived and breathed duty to the coalition. Now, you are risking an interstellar incident, burning your own government, and dragging us into the fire for a pet. I need to understand the math behind this. Elias." Elias finally turned to her. The hardened operative mask softened, revealing a profound, weary sadness. "The math is entirely broken, Jack. For my entire life, I measured worth by utility. I protected diplomats who were corrupt, and I eliminated targets who were just following orders. That was duty. Duty is a transaction. You perform a task. You get paid. You survive another cycle. But Barnaby does not understand duty. He does not care about my rank, my bank account, or the things I did in the dark." He took a breath, his voice steady but carrying immense weight. "He just loves me, unconditionally, without an agenda. In a galaxy that measures everything by power and leverage, that kind of purity is the rarest commodity in existence. The Zalans believe they can own it because they have the military might to take it. I am going to teach them the moral difference between possession and guardianship. If we let them take the one thing that actually matters without a fight, then humanity is already lost." Jax looked at him, the cynical armor she wore slipping for just a fraction of a second. She reached out, her dark hand brushing against his sleeve. The unspoken weight of their shared past hung between them, a tangle of old regrets and enduring affection. The universe was vast and cruel, but in that small, pressurized cabin, the bond of shared history felt stronger than the armor plating of a starship. Before she could reply, the proximity alarms on the main console flared a violent, blinding crimson. "Massive gravitational displacement dead ahead," Vex projected, their synthetic voice clipped and urgent. Kale was already moving, his heavy footsteps vibrating through the deck plates. Jax threw herself into the pilot's seat, looming out of the dark, like a leviathan rising from the deep ocean, was a Zalan dreadnought. It was a staggering masterpiece of destructive engineering, 2 miles long, plated in gleaming indestructible golden alloys. It bristled with enough heavy plasma artillery to glass a small moon. The Wraith was a speck of dust in its shadow. "They are initiating an active tachyon sweep," Vex announced, their mechanical limbs adjusting the stealth matrix. "Our passive metamaterials are insufficient. They will detect our thermal signature in exactly 45 seconds. Jax's hands flew across the controls. "Elias, I cannot outrun a tachyon ping. If we engage the hyperdrive, they will track the radiation trail straight back to Station 42. Elias stepped up behind her command chair, his tactical mind instantly taking over. The time for philosophical debate was gone. "Shut it down," Jax spun around, her glowing circuitry flashing in alarm. "Clarify." "Shut down the reactor," Elias ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Shut down the life support, The thermal regulators, the gravity plating, and the core computer. We drop to zero power. We become a cold, dead rock. Elias, the ambient temperature of this sector is near absolute zero. Kyle rumbled from the engineering station. Without thermal regulation, the ambient cold will penetrate the hull in less than 2 minutes. We will freeze to death. Not if they pass us quickly, Elias countered. Do it, Jax, now. Jax did not hesitate. She trusted Elias with her life, a habit that continually proved terrifying. She slammed her hand down on the primary kill switch. Instantly, the ship plunged into absolute darkness. The comforting hum of the engines died. The artificial gravity vanished, causing Elias and Jax to float slightly against their restraint harnesses. The silence was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Then, the cold began to creep in. It was not a gradual chill. It was a physical, aggressive force that penetrated the reinforced bulkheads instantly. Frost began to spiderweb across the interior of the main viewport. Elias could see his breath crystallizing in the air in front of him. Within a minute, his extremities began to ache, a deep, agonizing pain as the blood slowed in his veins. Vex powered down their non-essential servos, entering a low-power hibernation state to conserve battery life, while Kale's stone exterior grew rigid, his crystalline matrix groaning loudly under the thermal contraction. Through the rapidly freezing viewport, the Zale dreadnought passed. It was a terrifyingly slow procession. The golden hull blazed with artificial light, casting long, menacing shadows across the tiny, frozen cockpit of the Wraith. Elias watched the massive sensor arrays rotate, sweeping the empty space right where they drifted. The dreadnought was so close he could see the intricate, aristocratic crests etched into the hull plating. His heart hammered a slow, agonizing rhythm in his chest, an organic drumbeat that felt entirely too loud in the dead silence. The sweep passed over them. The stealth metamaterials, now completely devoid of internal heat, absorbed the tachyon ping perfectly. To the highly logical Zalen sensors, the Wraith was just another piece of useless floating debris caught in the planet's gravitational pull. It took another agonizing minute for the dreadnought's massive thrusters to ignite, propelling the behemoth out of the sector. "Power up," Elias gasped, his voice barely a whisper through chattering teeth. Jax slammed the ignition sequence. The lights flickered, died, and then flared to life. The reactor roared, pumping glorious, burning heat back into the ventilation system. The crew gasped for air as the life support scrubbers engaged. Elias rubbed his numb hands together, pain shooting up his arms as circulation violently returned. They had survived, utilizing a reckless, suicidal Earth tactic that the highly advanced elder races would never have anticipated. "Never ask me to do that again." Jax shivered, her obsidian skin pale. We are clear of the border blockade." Vex projected, their mechanical limbs unfreezing with a sharp mechanical adjustment. "Entering the inner system." The Wraith crested the final orbital plane, and the target finally came into view. Zale Prime hung in the void, a testament to unbridled, horrifying wealth and stagnant power. It was not a natural planet. It was an ecumenopolis, an entire world encased in overlapping layers of platinum and spun glass. Artificial orbital rings, glowing with trapped stellar energy, encircled the globe, regulating the climate for the elite aristocracy living below. The sheer scale of the civilization was paralyzing. Trillions of lives, an endless sea of wealth, all built on the subjugation of lesser species and ancient money. Elias stared at the golden world, the warmth fully returning to his blood. The infiltration of a planetary stronghold of this magnitude required more than just stealth. It required absolute precision. How they were going to slip past a planetary shield designed to repel entire armadas remained a mystery. Furthermore, Elias knew Vaxor was cunning, and exactly what the alien lord was doing to force Earth into a political corner was a question that deeply troubled his tactical instincts. Somewhere down there, in the glittering labyrinthine heart of that impregnable fortress, a terrified dog was waiting for him. "Take us into the lower atmosphere, Jax," Elias commanded, checking the charge on his plasma rifle. "Let us see what kind of welcome they have prepared for us." A millennia-old dynasty that had conquered 1,000 worlds was currently being systematically dismantled by an 80-pound shedding mammal with a penchant for chewing on priceless historical artifacts. Lord Vaxor stood on the sweeping balcony of his grand sanctum, watching a localized disaster unfold in real time. The sanctum was a breathtaking masterpiece of Zalean architecture, constructed from transparent polyglass and hovering a full mile above the capital city. It was designed to house relics from primitive species the Zalans had long ago driven to extinction. Currently, Barnaby was treating a fossilized femur of a Krellian apex predator as a highly satisfactory chew toy. Vaxor's elite handlers, clad in heavy ceremonial armor, stood around the room in absolute bewilderment. They possessed neural whips designed to subdue rampaging saurian beasts. But every time they activated the threatening hum of the energy field, the golden creature simply rolled onto his back, exposing his stomach in a baffling display of submission that completely short-circuited their complex threat assessment protocols. Furthermore, the creature was shedding violently. Golden filaments of hair drifted through the meticulously climate-controlled air, clinging stubbornly to the Grav silk tapestries and Vaxor's own glowing iridescent garments. "Why does it vibrate?" Vaxor demanded, pointing a long, translucent finger at the dog, who was currently panting heavily and thumping his tail against a crystalline pedestal. "We believe it is an inefficient method of thermal regulation, my lord," his chief vizier replied, brushing a thick clump of dog hair from his pristine robes with a look of profound disgust. "The creature is shockingly primitive. It requires constant sustenance. It lacks any form of telepathic resonance, and it leaves highly offensive biological waste in the Eastern Meditation Gardens. It is a defective asset." Vaxor waved a hand dismissively, his cold blue eyes narrowing. "The resonance was a secondary objective. Vizier, the primary objective is already in motion." He turned away from the domestic chaos, looking down at the sprawling, glittering expanse of Zale Prime. The city was a testament to unyielding power, a sea of gold and platinum stretching as far as the eye could see. Earth is growing entirely too confident. They are establishing unauthorized trade routes in the Outer Rim, deliberately ignoring the designated resource quotas assigned to them by the Coalition. They need a harsh, undeniable reminder of their place in the galactic hierarchy. By seizing the property of a decorated, albeit retired human military asset, we present Earth Command with an impossible choice. The Vizier nodded slowly, his multifaceted eyes processing the ruthless political maneuvering. If they retaliate with military force to retrieve the bio-unit, they break the Coalition Treaty, giving us the legal and moral authority to sterilize their home world and permanently seize their outer colonies. "Exactly," Vaxor purred, a cruel synthetic harmonic vibrating in his throat. "And if they do nothing, as they are currently doing, they broadcast their utter cowardice to the entire galaxy. They prove they will not defend their own citizens. They become a vassal state in all but name. We win either way. The ape will not dare come for his beast alone. The psychological dominance is absolute." Vaxor was a master of grand strategy, a predator who had spent centuries navigating the lethal politics of the High Court. However, he fundamentally misunderstood the sheer, terrifying stubbornness of a human who felt he had been wronged. Deep below the hovering palaces of the aristocracy, in the perpetually smog-choked industrial underlevels of the capital, The Wraith slipped seamlessly into a derelict maintenance bay. The lower city was a stark, horrifying contrast to the golden utopia above. It was a sunless labyrinth of rusted conduits, venting exhaust ports, and desperate indentured laborers who kept the paradise afloat through grueling physical toil. It was precisely the kind of harsh, unforgiving environment where Elias Thorne thrived. The boarding ramp lowered with a heavy hydraulic hiss, and the crew stepped out into the oppressive, chemical-laden air. Vex immediately deployed a series of microscopic surveillance drones, sending them scurrying up the towering structural pylons to tap into the city's massive, heavily guarded data stream. Kale took a defensive posture by the entrance of the bay, his stone exterior blending perfectly with the surrounding gray rubble, acting as an immovable, silent sentry. Jax pulled a heavy synthetic cowl over her head, concealing the glowing purple circuitry of her skin. She moved close to Elias, her voice dropping to a harsh, tactical whisper. "We are completely blind down here. If the internal security grid detects an unregistered energy signature or a foreign biological presence, they will vent this entire sector into the upper atmosphere without a second thought. We need hard intel. Fast." Vex's synthesized voice crackled over their internal comms. "I have successfully breached the localized network. The data architecture is incredibly arrogant. They do not anticipate internal cyber threats because they firmly believe their lower castes are too ignorant and broken to organize a rebellion. Download the architectural schematics for Vaxor's estate," Elias commanded, his eyes scanning the gloomy shadows of the hangar, checking the charge on his plasma rifle. "I need to know exactly where they are holding him." Vex paused, a distinct rarity for the hyper-efficient cybernetic organism. "Elias, I am pulling encrypted communication logs from the estate's primary server. This confiscation was not a random act of aristocratic vanity. It was a highly calculated political probe." Vex streamed the translated text directly to Elias's wrist-mounted tactical display. As Elias read Vaxor's communiques to the Zalean Military High Command, the pieces of the puzzle violently slammed into place. The trap was perfectly, flawlessly designed. Earth Command had played right into Vaxor's hands by ordering Elias to stand down, opting for the path of quiet submission to avoid a war. But Vaxor had not accounted for Elias severing his ties with Earth completely. By going rogue, Elias had effectively stepped outside the boundaries of Vaxor's carefully constructed political snare. Yet, a chilling thought settled in Elias's mind. If Vaxor was actively monitoring Earth's response and predicting their movements, had he anticipated a lone wolf infiltration? The hairs on the back of Elias's neck stood up, a primal warning system honed over decades of warfare that told him they were walking on the edge of a blade. "He wants a war," Elias said grimly, projecting the data for Jax to read. "He took Barnaby to force Earth into a suicidal retaliation, or to break our spirit entirely." Jax studied the glowing green text, her jaw tightening. "This changes the parameters. Thorne, you are not just rescuing your dog anymore. You are standing in the exact center of a geopolitical powder keg. If you fire a single shot up there, Vaxor might just use it as the excuse he needs to rally the coalition and obliterate your species. Then we do not fire a shot until we absolutely have to," Elias replied, his voice a block of solid ice. "If we get in, we get the dog, and we vanish before they even realize their security has been compromised. Vex, give me the tactical layout of the estate." A three-dimensional blue hologram flickered to life in the palm of Vex's upper right hand. It displayed Vaxor's floating palace, a sprawling complex of reinforced towers, sweeping gardens, and subterranean vaults. Surrounding the entire structure was a pulsing, perfectly spherical energy field. "The estate is protected by a Class 9 kinetic dome," Vex explained, tracing the glowing shield with a metallic finger. It is drawing ambient energy directly from the city's central power grid. It is completely impenetrable to conventional weaponry, cloaking fields, and unauthorized biological matter. A direct aerial or ground assault is a statistical impossibility. The shield would atomize us on contact. Kyle leaned forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the hologram. We cannot break the shield with brute force. Therefore, we must convince the shield to break itself. If the energy source is tethered directly to the city's power grid, a localized disruption in the underlevels could theoretically cause a micro-fluctuation in the dome above. A brownout, Jax translated, her eyes narrowing as she ran the complex calculations in her head. If we overload a primary distribution node down here, the grid will automatically divert power from the upper levels to compensate and prevent a catastrophic meltdown. For exactly 3.4 seconds, the kinetic dome will drop to allow the energy transfer. 3 seconds is an incredibly narrow window for a stealth insertion, Vex noted, their optical sensors whirring as they processed the tactical variables. The margin for error is effectively 0. It is all the time we need, Elias said, his gaze fixed firmly on the holographic palace. He knew the staggering risks. He knew the odds of coordinating a synchronized blackout and a high-altitude breach were practically non-existent. But he also knew the alternative was leaving his best friend in the hands of a monster who viewed life as a disposable asset. We caused the distraction here, but we still need physical access codes to navigate the interior security doors once we breach the perimeter. Vaxor's personal guard operates on rotating military ciphers. Jax sighed, a heavy, exhausted sound that spoke of old, dangerous alliances she had hoped to leave behind. I know someone, a coalition informant who operates out of the transit hub a few sectors over. He trades in high-level access keys for the black market. He owes me a massive favor from a smuggling run that went severely sideways on Orion Prime. If anyone has the current ciphers for Vaxor's estate, it is him. Elias looked at her, recognizing the deep reluctance in her posture. Trusting an underworld informant deep in enemy territory was a massive risk, the kind of variable that usually got operatives killed. But they were entirely out of safe options. The clock was ticking, and the longer Barnaby remained in that pristine alien environment, the closer Vaxor came to realizing his dark political ambitions. They needed those codes, and they needed to move upward into the gilded, heavily armed cage waiting in the sky. The difference between a master thief and a vaporized fool usually comes down to 3 seconds of stolen electricity. Tonight, Elias Thorne was betting his entire existence on exactly that margin. Jax returned from the transit hub an hour later with a physical data drive clutched tightly in her hand. Her obsidian skin was drawn taut with anxiety, the purple subdermal circuitry pulsing in an erratic, agitated rhythm. She had met her contact, a slippery avian smuggler named Corv, and secured the military ciphers. Corv had asked entirely too many questions, a detail that sat like a block of lead in Elias's stomach. But the operational clock was bleeding away. They were out of time for caution. The infiltration sequence began in the suffocating depths of the Undercity. Vex and Kale positioned themselves at the primary distribution node, a massive, humming monolith of industrial engineering that fed power to the floating palaces above. Kale's massive stone hands gripped the heavy titanium locking levers of the main coolant line, while Vex interfaced directly with the city's raw, rushing data stream. High above them, clinging to the freezing exterior of a maintenance elevator shaft, Elias and Jax waited just outside the lethal perimeter of Vaxor's glowing kinetic dome. Vex initiated the command. Down below, Kale physically ripped the coolant levers from their reinforced housings, an act of sheer, terrifying brute force that triggered an immediate, massive thermal spike in the planetary grid. The city's automated defense systems panicked. power was instantly siphoned from the upper echelons to prevent a thermonuclear detonation in the crowded slums. The glowing, impenetrable sphere surrounding Vaxor's estate flickered, whined in protest, and vanished. Elias and Jax engaged their micro-thrusters, launching themselves across the yawning, mile-high abyss. They sailed through the freezing air and cleared the threshold a fraction of a second before the city's backup generators kicked in. The kinetic dome slammed back into existence behind them with a concussive shockwave that rattled their teeth and turned the air to ozone. They were inside. The interior of the palace was a sickening display of hoarded ancient wealth. They moved silently through sweeping corridors lined with tapestries woven from crushed diamonds and statues carved from the bones of extinct leviathans. Jax plugged Corv's data drive into the security keypads, the stolen ciphers overriding the biometric scanners with alarming ease. They descended into the private menagerie, a sprawling subterranean complex of reinforced climate-controlled habitats. And there he was, behind a heavy wall of transparent plasteel. Barnaby was asleep on a pile of priceless grav silk cushions. He looked up, his ears twitching as he caught a familiar scent cutting through the sterile, filtered air. His tail began a slow, rhythmic thump against the floorboards, a sound of pure, uncomplicated recognition. Elias felt a sudden, fierce tightness in his chest, a wave of profound relief crashing over him. He stepped forward to trigger the manual release mechanism on the wall. The plasteel door did not open. Instead, the security keypad flashed a violent, blinding red. A heavy magnetic lockdown seal slammed shut over the habitat, and the ambient lighting in the corridor shifted instantly to a harsh, pulsating crimson. Corv had not just sold them the entry codes. The informant had sold their exact entry vector to the Zale Imperial Guard for a staggering bounty. The hidden walls at the far end of the corridor irised open seamlessly, revealing a dozen of Vaxor's elite shock troops. They wore heavily armored carapace suits that gleamed like polished obsidian and carried rapid-fire plasma accelerators. The quiet, surgical stealth mission evaporated in a blinding flash of superheated gas. Elias moved with lethal, ingrained muscle memory. He shoved Jax roughly behind a massive marble pillar as the air where they had just been standing turned to liquid fire. Elias returned fire immediately, his heavy tactical sidearm barking a deep, percussive rhythm that echoed violently in the enclosed space. He did not waste ammunition aiming for their impenetrable chest plates. He calculated the microscopic gaps in their armor joints. Dropping two advancing guards in rapid succession with terrifying, mathematical precision, Jax leaned out from cover, her kinetic blaster tearing massive chunks of ancient masonry from the ceiling to rain down on the troops, forcing them to break formation. The intense barrage suddenly ceased. The guards held their positions, their weapons trained flawlessly on the shattered marble pillar. A life-sized, incredibly detailed hologram of Lord Vaxor materialized in the center of the smoking crossfire. He was casually sipping a glowing azure liquid from a crystal chalice, looking profoundly amused by the destruction. "I must admit, human," Vaxor's synthesized voice echoed smoothly through the ruined corridor. "I did not expect you to actually breach the perimeter. You are remarkably resilient for a creature with such a tragically short, irrelevant lifespan. But you are trapped." The avian informant was quite eager to secure his own financial future. "Let the dog go, Vaxor," Elias called out, his voice a steady, terrifying calm despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "This transaction is between you and me." "It is not a transaction, ape, and it is certainly not between equals," Vaxor replied, stepping through the holographic projection of a burning tapestry. "You are laboring under the profound delusion that your desires matter. I view that creature as an object, a minor biological curiosity to be possessed, studied, and discarded when it bores me. My empire has endured for 10,000 years because we understand the fundamental, unyielding nature of the universe. Power dictates ownership. Emotion is a weakness, a chemical defect that severely clouds tactical judgment. You are willing to throw your life away for a lesser beast that cannot even comprehend the abstract concept of sacrifice. Elias checked his thermal magazine, slamming a fresh one home with a sharp, metallic click. Your empire has endured for 10,000 years because you are parasites. You sit in your hovering palaces, stealing the labor of the people starving in the dark below you, hoarding artifacts from worlds you burn to ash. You measure the entire universe in credits and kinetic force, but you understand absolutely nothing about actual value. Elias stepped slightly out of cover, his eyes locked on the arrogant alien lord. That dog has more loyalty, more pure, uncalculated empathy in his heart than your entire ruling class possesses in their collective history. You call emotion a defect. I call it the only metric that separates the living from the dead. You are a stagnant, rotting corpse of a civilization. Vaxxer. And you are terrified because you possess the wealth of 1,000 worlds. But you cannot buy what he gives me for free. The amusement instantly vanished from Vaxor's face, replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. His crystalline features hardened into a mask of pure malice. He waved a translucent hand toward the heavily armed troops. Burn them out! Leave nothing but ash for the janitorial drones. The hologram flickered and died, and the corridor erupted into absolute chaos. Plasma fire chewed relentlessly through the marble pillar, melting the ancient, priceless stone into glowing, toxic slag. Elias and Jax were entirely pinned down, severely outgunned, and rapidly running out of physical cover. Worse, the heavy blast doors leading to the inner containment ring, where the manual overrides for Barnaby's cage were housed, began to slide shut as the internal security protocols locked down the sector entirely. Jax looked at the closing blast door, then at the advancing wall of armored guards, and finally at Elias. Her violet eyes blazed with a fierce, absolute resolve. She possessed a tactical mind that rivaled his own, and she understood the brutal reality perfectly. They could not both make it through that narrowing gap under this volume of suppressive fire. Jax, no, Elias said, reading the grim calculation on her face, his voice cracking with sudden, unfamiliar panic. You owe me a very expensive drink for this thorn, Jax said, flashing a harsh, brilliant smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She grabbed him by the tactical vest, her cybernetic strength easily overpowering his human frame, and hurled him bodily through the rapidly closing gap of the blast doors. Elias hit the floor rolling, twisting around just in time to see Jax turn her back to him. She raised both her blasters, stepping out from the melting cover to face the overwhelming Zale force head-on. The heavy steel doors slammed shut with a deafening, final thud, locking securely from the outside. A moment later, the access panel on Elias's side shattered, sparking violently as Jax destroyed the external controls from the corridor to ensure the guards could not immediately follow him into the holding area. Elias was alone in the inner containment ring with Barnaby, the deafening sounds of the firefight muffled by feet of solid steel. The cost of entry had just become unbearably high. He was trapped deep inside a hostile, impenetrable fortress. The entire planetary guard was mobilizing against him, and the woman he had sworn to protect was now at the mercy of a tyrant who possessed absolutely none. There is a dangerous threshold a man crosses when he accepts that he is not making it home. A quiet space where fear is replaced by absolute, cold-blooded purpose. Elias Thorne pushed himself off the scorched floorboards of the inner containment ring and stared at the heavy steel blast doors that now separated him from Jax. The muffled, chaotic vibrations of the firefight outside had abruptly ceased, replaced by a heavy, ominous silence. He knew what that meant. Jax was captured. She was a bargaining chip now, and Elias was entirely out of moves to play on Vaxor's terms. He turned away from the sealed door and walked toward the reinforced plasteel habitat. Barnaby was pacing happily behind the transparent barrier, a golden blur of unbothered canine energy. Elias did not bother looking for a key code. He drew his heavy tactical sidearm, calibrated the plasma output to maximum density, and shot the locking mechanism point blank. The heavy magnetic seals shattered into a shower of white-hot slag, and the door slid open with a grinding protest. Barnaby practically flew out of the enclosure. He slammed his front paws into Elias's chest, his tail wagging with enough force to bruise, his tongue frantically seeking Elias's face. For a brief, stolen moment, Elias dropped to one knee, burying his face in the thick golden fur. The familiar earthy scent of the dog grounded him, a tether to the life he had fought so hard to build and was now watching burn to ash. "Good boy," Elias whispered, his voice incredibly tight. "I know, buddy. I missed you too." He stood up, his tactical mind snapping back to the brutal reality of their situation. The planetary guard was descending on the estate. The perimeter was locked tight. There was no ghost ship extraction waiting at the balcony, and there was no stealthy retreat back through the underlevels. A shadow fell over Elias's thoughts, dark and absolute. He remembered General Vance's warning about the fragile state of Earth's reputation. If Elias died here in a quiet, forgotten cell, Vaxor would control the narrative. The Zalean Empire would broadcast the execution of a rogue human operative, proving to the entire galactic coalition that humanity was weak, easily broken, and incapable of defending its own. They would turn Earth into a political vassal state within a decade. Elias realized that mere survival was no longer the objective. Earth needed a deterrent. They needed a retaliation so disproportionate, so breathtakingly destructive, that no elder race would ever dare look at a human colony with predatory intent again. He could not just kill Vaxor. Martyrs only strengthened ancient empires. He had to kill the empire itself. His eyes scanned the inner containment ring, landing on a master overseer terminal situated near the center of the room. It was a crystalline pedestal glowing with a steady stream of complex Zalean data, designed to monitor the biological signatures of the menagerie. But Vex had mentioned earlier that the estate's internal network was arrogant, interconnected, and deeply flawed. The overseer terminal was tethered to the palace's central mainframe, which in turn was inextricably linked to the Zalon planetary financial and intelligence nexus. Elias rushed to the terminal, pulling a hardened decryption spike from his tactical vest. He jammed the device into the primary data port. The holographic interface instantly flared a violent, angry crimson, detecting the unauthorized foreign intrusion. Elias's hands flew across his wrist-mounted tactical display, executing a brutal, archaic Black Ops splicing algorithm he had not used since the Vanguard campaigns. He was not looking to steal credits or shut down defense turrets. He was looking for the foundational architecture of Zalean society. The empire was built on a rigid, unbreakable social hierarchy. The aristocracy hoarded the wealth, controlled the resources, and kept the trillions of lower caste citizens in line through a complex web of manufactured scarcity, political blackmail, and generational debt. Vaxor's private servers held the absolute truth, the ledgers detailing how the elites artificially starved the undercity, the illicit trade agreements that funded their luxury, and the highly classified leverage they used to keep rival nobles subjugated. If Elias planted a bomb, the city would rebuild. If he planted the truth, the city would tear itself apart. Come on," Elias muttered, watching the progress bar on his wrist display crawl agonizingly through the heavy imperial firewalls. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The hacking process required his absolute, undivided attention. He was actively battling heavily automated counter-intrusion programs. rerouting his signal through dozens of proxy servers to keep the Zale system from isolating his exact location and locking him out. Behind him, the main blast doors began to hum. The center of the heavy steel was glowing a dull, angry orange. Vaxor's elite shock troops were cutting through with heavy thermal breaches. Elias had perhaps 2 minutes before the doors gave way entirely. He pushed the decryption algorithm harder, bypassing a secondary security protocol that guarded Vaxor's personal blackmail vault. The sheer volume of data was staggering. It was centuries of concentrated malice, reduced to cold, indisputable mathematics. Elias set the destination for the data dump to broadcast on every unencrypted frequency, every public viewing screen, and every personal neural implant in the entire lower city, as well as the private communication channels of Vaxor's bitterest political rivals. He was so intensely focused on the holographic streams of data that he entirely missed the subtle hiss of a secondary service hatch opening on the far wall. It was a narrow access corridor used by automated cleaning drones, barely large enough for a person. But a single Zalen elite guard, clad in full obsidian carapace armor, had managed to squeeze through, bypassing the heavily fortified main doors. The guard stepped into the containment ring, his heavy plasma accelerator raised and leveled squarely at the back of Elias's head. Elias caught the reflection of the armored figure in the glowing crystalline monitor. His heart slammed violently against his ribs. He was locked into the terminal, both hands actively maintaining the fragile data stream. If he broke connection now to draw his weapon, the upload would fail, the firewall would permanently lock the system, and his one chance to break the Empire would evaporate. But if he did not move, he was going to die in less than a second. The guard planted his heavy, magnetically locked boots onto the floorboards, stabilizing his stance to fire a lethal, concentrated plasma burst. Barnaby, who had been busy entirely ignoring the glowing orange blast doors in favor of thoroughly inspecting his new surroundings, suddenly noticed the newcomer. To an 80-pound golden retriever, a towering alien in shiny black armor did not register as a lethal threat. It registered as a highly interesting new friend who had just arrived for a playdate. Barnaby grabbed the massive fossilized Krellian femur bone in his jaws. He spun around, his tail wagging furiously, and bounded across the room with all the uncoordinated, joyful enthusiasm of a creature completely devoid of malice. The Zalen guard's finger tightened on the firing mechanism just as 80 pounds of dense muscle, thick fur, and pure kinetic joy slammed directly into his knees. The heavy armored alien, trained to anticipate highly sophisticated kinetic strikes and plasma artillery, was fundamentally unprepared to be enthusiastically tackled at the knees by a large, happy mammal. Barnaby became tangled in the guard's legs, the heavy fossilized bone wedging perfectly between the rigid armor plating of the alien's greaves. The guard lost his balance completely. He pitched violently backward, his arms flailing in a desperate attempt to stay upright. The plasma accelerator discharged wildly as he fell, sending a searing bolt of blue energy tearing harmlessly into the vaulted ceiling, showering the room in a cascade of ancient plaster and sparking electrical wires. He hit the floorboards with a massive, concussive impact, his armor ringing like a struck bell. The distraction was exactly 1.5 seconds long. It was entirely enough. Elias broke his left hand away from the terminal, drew his sidearm in a single fluid blur of motion, and fired. The concentrated plasma bolt struck the precise microscopic joint where the guard's helmet met his chest plate. The alien went instantly limp, his armor powering down with a fading hum. Barnaby dropped the heavy bone, looking mildly startled by the falling debris and the sudden noise, then trotted over to Elias, offering a small, inquisitive whine. "Best dog in the universe," Elias breathed, his hands violently shaking as he slammed his left hand back onto the terminal interface to stabilize the fluctuating data stream. The upload progress bar surged forward, hitting 90%. The truth was packaging itself, ready to flood the entire planet. A deafening groan of tortured metal echoed through the room. The center of the main blast doors finally turned to liquid slag, spilling a glowing puddle of molten steel onto the floor. The heavy locks shattered, and the doors began to violently pry apart as a dozen heavy plasma rifles immediately tracked into the room, searching for targets. A single keystroke is completely silent, yet it can echo louder than 1,000 detonating warheads. Elias Thorne was about to prove that raw truth, unleashed at precisely the right moment, was the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. The progress bar on his wrist-mounted tactical display hit 100%. Elias ripped the hardened decryption spike from the terminal. The holographic interface of the Overseer console instantly shattered into a cascade of brilliant, blinding white light. Across the staggering, glittering expanse of Zale Prime, every single public viewing screen, every commercial data pad, and every personal neural implant simultaneously overrode. The endless, heavily curated stream of state-sponsored propaganda was instantly replaced by raw, unredacted financial ledgers and classified intelligence reports. In the toxic, suffocating depths of the Undercity, indentured laborers dropped their heavy industrial tools, staring at the glowing data feeds that mathematically proved their generational starvation was artificially engineered to subsidize the High Court's lavish luxury. In the opulent floating estates of rival nobles, powerful aristocrats read the precise blackmail files Vaxor had cultivated over centuries to keep their houses subjugated and compliant. The reaction across the planet was not a gradual, measured shift in political discourse. It was an immediate, violent explosion of collective planet-wide rage. Back in the containment ring, the heavy steel blast doors were finally pried apart by Vaxor's elite shock troops. But as the heavily armored guards stormed the room with their plasma rifles raised, their internal military comms channels dissolved into absolute screaming panic. Their chain of command was disintegrating in real time. Rival noble houses were already deploying their private armadas against Vaxor's estate, while the massive, uncounted millions of the lower castes were actively storming the lower transit elevators. The guards hesitated, looking away from Elias and down at their flashing wrist displays as the structural integrity of their entire civilization crumbled beneath their feet. Elias did not waste the narrow tactical window. "Stay close," he commanded Barnaby. He raised his heavy plasma rifle and charged directly into the breach. He did not aim to kill, he aimed to entirely disorient. He fired rapid kinetic bursts into the overhead lighting fixtures, plunging the corridor into sudden chaotic darkness, followed by concussive rounds driven directly into the floorboards to send jagged marble shrapnel flying in all directions. The heavily armored Zalen guards, highly trained for structured military engagements and predictable enemy formations, were utterly unprepared for the ruthless close-quarters brutality of a desperate human operative utilizing sheer chaos as a weapon. Elias moved like a phantom through the thick smoke and flashing red emergency lights, his every instinct screaming to find Jax. The terrifying question of whether she had survived her capture burned vividly in his mind, propelling him forward with a terrifying, singular focus. He tracked the unique biometric signature from her cybernetic implants on his tactical display. A faint purple blip buried deep within the estate's primary subterranean detention block. How long the localized power would hold before the rioting completely severed the estate's life support systems remained a deadly, ticking clock. He breached the primary detention sector just as the estate's localized gravity dampeners began to violently fail. A direct result of the rebellion in the city below severing the main power conduits. The air grew momentarily weightless, sending loose debris floating lazily toward the vaulted ceiling. Elias kicked off a shattered marble pillar, sailing fluidly through the air to deliver a crushing physical blow with the heavy tungsten stock of his rifle to the single remaining guard standing outside a reinforced interrogation cell. The alien crumpled to the floor, unconscious before he even registered the strike. Elias blew the magnetic locks off the cell door with a point-blank plasma round. Inside, Jax was chained to a heavy metallic restraint chair. Her obsidian skin was bruised, and the glowing purple circuitry beneath her skin flickered dimly, indicating severe energy depletion from extensive interrogation. Yet, her violet eyes were blazing with unbroken, defiant fury. As the heavy restraints powered down, she slumped forward, catching herself heavily on Elias's shoulder. "You are incredibly late, Thorn," Jax breathed, a weak but genuine smile crossing her exhausted face. "I had to file some complicated paperwork with the local authorities," Elias replied smoothly, pulling her arm firmly over his shoulder to support her weight. Barnaby bounded eagerly into the cramped room, immediately licking Jax's hand with unrestrained enthusiasm. Jax laughed, a rich, melodic sound that cut sharply through the grim reality of their situation. "Your bio unit has terrible tactical timing, but absolutely excellent morale." They fought their way upward, ascending the grand sweeping staircases toward the sweeping sanctum where Vaxor had first observed his crumbling empire. The palace was literally tearing itself apart. Deafening explosions rocked the foundation as rival gunships bombarded the kinetic dome, which was flickering wildly and failing in massive, jagged patches as the planetary grid collapsed entirely. The opulent, gilded corridors were now littered with shattered polyglass, burning grav silk tapestries, and the discarded weapons of fleeing servants. They found Lord Vaxor in the exact center of his ruined sanctum. He was completely alone. His elite handlers had fled for the emergency escape pods, and his loyal personal guard had dissolved into the chaotic civil war consuming the city. Vaxor was clutching a heavy ceremonial energy pike, his pristine iridescent garments torn and stained with soot. The grand floor-to-ceiling windows behind him displayed a city totally engulfed in flames. The artificial sky choked with the black smoke of 1,000 burning palaces. "You ruined everything," Vaxor snarled, his synthesized voice cracking with raw, unfiltered emotion. The profound irony of the cold alien lord finally succumbing to the very emotional volatility he had so deeply despised was not lost on Elias. A millennia of absolute order, a perfect society destroyed in a single hour by a primitive ape and a defective beast. Vaxor lunged forward with terrifying speed, swinging the crackling energy pike in a lethal, sweeping arc. Elias shoved Jax roughly aside and ducked beneath the glowing plasma blade, the intense heat shearing off a lock of his graying hair. Elias pivoted sharply on his heel, driving his heavy combat boot directly into Vaxor's midsection. The alien lord gasped, stumbling backward and dropping the heavy pike. Elias swept his leg, sending Vaxor crashing violently to the polished floorboards. Elias stepped over the fallen aristocrat, aiming the smoking barrel of his sidearm squarely at Vaxor's chest. The alien looked up, his cold blue eyes wide with the sudden, terrifying realization of his own mortality. He expected to die. He expected the brutal, transactional logic of the universe to claim him, because that was the only law his species had ever respected. "Finish it, human," Vaxor commanded, struggling desperately to maintain his arrogant, aristocratic facade. "Kill me. Claim your violent victory." Elias stared down at the broken tyrant. He thought about the long, bloody years he had spent operating in the dark, executing enemies of the coalition without a second thought to maintain a fragile peace. He thought about the cold, calculating man he used to be, the ruthless instrument of state-sanctioned violence who measured the universe entirely in tactical advantages. Then, he felt a warm, wet nose nudge his free hand. Barnaby was standing right beside him, completely unbothered by the violence, the smoke, and the screaming city, simply offering his quiet, unwavering presence, slowly, deliberately. Elias lowered his weapon. "No," Elias said, his voice a flat, unyielding absolute. If I kill you, I prove that you are right. I prove that power is strictly about who holds the biggest gun and who is willing to pull the trigger. That is your metric, Vaxor. It is not mine. Vaxor stared at him in profound, uncomprehending disbelief. You are sparing me, after everything I have done? You are a fool. I am leaving you to the people you starved, the rivals you blackmailed, and the empire you built entirely on lies. Elias replied, turning his back completely on the ruined aristocrat. True strength is not the capacity to destroy your enemies. It is the discipline to show mercy when they deserve it the least. You are going to live, Vaxor, and you are going to watch your entire legacy burn to ash. That is a fate far worse than a plasma bolt. Elias, Jax, and Barnaby walked out of the ruined sanctum, leaving Lord Vaxor kneeling in the smoking wreckage of his own monumental hubris. Listening to the deafening roar of the approaching rebellion as the lower castes finally stormed the gilded gates of the High Court, the extraction back to the ghost ship was still a monumental hurdle, and the massive political wrath of the coalition was yet to be fully calculated. But Elias knew one thing with absolute, undeniable certainty. The galaxy would forever remember the day a human tore an empire from the sky, and no one would ever mistake their quiet nature for weakness again. A collapsing civilization makes for a spectacularly dangerous exit strategy, especially when your pilot is severely wounded and your primary cargo is enthusiastically trying to catch falling sparks on his tongue. Elias Thorne supported Jax's weight entirely, navigating the crumbling gilded corridors of Vaxor's estate as the planetary rebellion turned the sky above Zale Prime into a canvas of fire. They reached the derelict maintenance bay just as the ceiling began to structurally fail. Kyle, the massive Silici-based warrior, was standing entirely still beneath a buckling titanium support beam, physically holding thousands of tons of ancient masonry aloft with his broad stone shoulders. He offered a polite, strained greeting, suggesting they expedite their boarding process as his crystalline matrix was reaching its maximum load-bearing capacity. Vex had the Wraith's engines running, the stealth interceptor vibrating violently against the docking clamps. Elias half-carried, half-dragged Jax up the boarding ramp, with Barnaby trotting happily behind them, blissfully unaware of the apocalyptic destruction raining down around their heads. As soon as the heavy ramp sealed shut, Kyle released the support beam and lunged for the ship. The hangar collapsed behind him in a blinding wave of crushed rock and twisted metal. Jax, despite her severe energy depletion, refused the medical cot. She strapped herself into the pilot's chair, her trembling hands flying across the navigation console. She engaged the void sync engine, throwing the Wraith into a steep, stomach-churning vertical climb. Navigating the atmosphere of Zale Prime was a nightmare of kinetic variables. Hijacked planetary defense cannons were blindly firing into the artificial sky, tearing golden aristocratic dreadnoughts into flaming shrapnel. Jax flew the stealth ship like a scalpel, slicing through the chaotic crossfire, using the massive, blooming explosions of dying warships to mask their thermal signature. Elias sat in the co-pilot seat, his hands gripping the restraint harness as debris the size of city blocks tumbled past their reinforced viewport. It was a harrowing, breathtaking dance on the razor edge of annihilation, but Jax's brilliant, reckless flying prevailed. They punched through the failing kinetic atmosphere and vanished into the freezing, indifferent safety of deep space, leaving the ashes of a 10,000-year-old empire in their wake. The political fallout across the galactic coalition was immediate, absolute, and entirely unprecedented. The elder races watched in sheer, paralyzed horror as the unredacted data dump flooded the interstellar networks. The Zalan Empire did not just fall, it shattered into 1 million warring factions overnight, utterly consumed by the righteous fury of 1 trillion subjugated citizens. But what terrified the galactic elite more than the rebellion was the chilling truth of how it started. Security feeds from Vaxor's ruined estate were recovered and broadcast across the neutral zones. The galaxy watched a single retired human operative dismantle an impregnable fortress, bypass a planetary defense grid, and topple a multi-star system dynasty, all to retrieve a fluffy, non-sentient quadruped. The elder races had always calculated humanity as a minor, manageable variable. They believed Earth was soft, eager to please and deeply terrified of conflict. Instead, they discovered that humans possessed a terrifying, dormant capacity for absolute disproportionate violence when their pack was threatened. The diplomatic tone shifted overnight. Arrogant alien ambassadors who had previously ignored Earth's representatives suddenly began bowing with deep, nervous respect in the coalition halls. Trade sanctions against human colonies were quietly lifted. The elder races realized that while humanity might prefer peace, they were undeniably dangerously mad apes who would gladly burn the galaxy to the ground for the sake of loyalty. Whether the shattered remnants of the Zalean loyalists would one day attempt to hunt Elias down remained a dark, lingering question. But for now, the galaxy gave humanity a very wide, very respectful berth. Deep within the fortified bunker of Earth Command, General Vance reviewed the staggering intelligence reports. He watched the holographic footage of Elias turning his back on Lord Vaxor, choosing a profoundly human mercy over an alien execution. Vance poured himself a stiff drink, realizing that Elias Thorne had single-handedly secured Earth's borders for the next century through sheer, terrifying reputation alone. The United Earth Directorate officially maintained their stance that Elias was a rogue actor. But 3 days later, Elias received a highly encrypted, untraceable message on a burner frequency. It contained a single line of text confirming his military pension had been fully reinstated with back pay, followed by a polite request to absolutely never contact Earth Command again. Elias, Jax, Kale, and Vex did not return to the neon-drenched corruption of Station 42. They took the Wraith to the deep, uncharted frontier, entirely beyond the reach of coalition politics and ancient grudges. They settled on a lush, unnamed world bathed in the warm light of twin golden suns. The air smelled of ozone and crushed pine, and the vibrant violet grass rolled endlessly toward a crystal-clear ocean. It was a quiet place, a blank canvas where they could finally lay down the heavy burdens of their past. Elias stood on the wooden porch of the homestead they had built together. He watched Jax sitting in the tall grass, her cybernetic circuitry humming a peaceful, vibrant blue as she calibrated a moisture evaporator. The unresolved tension between them had finally dissolved, replaced by a deep, enduring partnership forged in the fires of an impossible survival. They had both stopped running. A sudden burst of movement caught Elias's eye. Barnaby was sprinting across the meadow, his golden fur glowing brightly under the twin suns. He was enthusiastically, and entirely unsuccessfully, chasing a hovering six-winged avian creature. The dog leaped into the air, snapped his jaws at empty space, and tumbled gracefully into the soft violet grass, immediately rolling onto his back with a wide, panting smile. Elias smiled, a genuine expression that finally reached his eyes. The universe was a bizarre, violent, and deeply unpredictable place. It was filled with ancient empires, terrifying technology, and cold, calculating logic. But as Elias looked at the dog who had inadvertently toppled a dynasty, he understood the greatest moral lesson of his life. True power was not measured in plasma batteries, planetary shields, or hoarded credits. True power was the willingness to risk everything for the ones you love, and the profound, unbreakable grace of unconditional guardianship. Thank you so much for watching and exploring this journey with me. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans. Drop down into the comments and leave the word loyalty so I know you made it to the very end of the adventure. Also, be sure to hit that hype button so this channel can reach more incredible viewers just like you.